You join us in Listvianka in southern Siberia, just north of the Mongolian border, sandwiched between Kazakhstan to the west and China to the east. We're here to drive this, the latest Mazda CX-5, a mid-size SUV that competes with the likes of the Kia Sportage, Toyota RAV4 and Volkswagen Tiguan. It's the sort of car that's popular with families, making it a common sight on the school-run routes of Great Britain. That being the case, why on earth have we travelled more than 5,000 miles to drive it when we could have easily given it a try back home? Well, because we had a little question that we wanted answering. Just because this is a car that you'll use for the school run, does that mean that it's all it can do? To find out, we'll be jumping into this perfectly normal, perfectly standard four-wheel drive CX-5, and we'll be going on the world's most extreme school run. That over there is Lake Baikal. It's 25 million years old, 400 miles long, 50 miles wide, 1 mile deep, and it holds 20% of all the unfrozen fresh water on the planet. Luckily, there's just a little bit of frozen stuff on top that's going to allow us to drive right on over it. Once we're over the lake, we'll be finishing in a town called Ulan-Ude, where we will be dropping the kids off at school. And the kids in question? Well, they're not my kids. These are my kids, Felix, who's 4, and Bess, who's 2. But there's no way I was going to bring them here, because what we're about to do is genuinely quite dangerous. Yes, the routes have been scouted in advance, but there is still a very real danger of falling through the ice. And for that reason, I've employed these rather creepy substitutes. And even if we manage to stay above the waterline, it's -8 out here, -18 with wind chill, so there's still a very real risk of cold exposure. So with that in mind, I think it's time to get in the car. So here we are, just rolling onto the ice, and we are on. And that is one big expanse of ice. So we had a briefing this morning, and the safety team told us that basically, although this is one large bit of ice, the ice is constantly cracking all over the place, so it's constantly evolving, constantly changing the whole time. And their job isn't to plot a course that won't crack. Their job is to take us around the cracks, some that are already there, some that might pop up along the way. So far we've encountered two basic sorts of surface. You've got absolute sheer sheet ice that has pretty much zero grip, and you've got to really crawl over it as slow as you can. And then you've got mounds of snow built up that the wind's just sent over in drifts, and that's where you've got to put your foot down and just power through it. So that means you're constantly on and off the throttle the whole time, mediating that. You've got to steer around the slippery bits. It's very, very demanding. Now, I have driven one of these things back in Blighty. I've even done the school run in it, and I can tell you that it is very, very competent. It's pretty comfortable, a little bit on the firm side perhaps, but comfortable enough to keep the kids happy, nice and quiet. And when you drop the kids off at school and you're dashing to work, trying not to be late, again, then the handling is also really tidy. It's got good body control, lots of grip, sharp steering, just the job. Obviously, our priorities are a little bit different here. Here, it's all about traction, having enough of it to keep yourself going and having enough control to keep yourself going in the right direction. And that's the difficult bit, because, you know, even though we've got studded tyres, we are still on sheet ice, slipping and sliding all over the place. We've also been told that veering off our predetermined course, even by a couple of feet, can result in pretty bad things happening. It's not really what you want to hear when you're struggling to keep control of your car. And that means it requires 100% concentration for 100% of the time. And that means it's
pretty darn tiring, if I'm honest. We're maybe 14 kilometres into our 70 odd kilometre journey and already it's pretty tiring. I think this is going to be a long old day. As you can see, the convoy stopped for a minute, so let's take the opportunity to see how the CX-5 fares as a family car, and so how it copes with the school run. As you can see, loads of space in the back, plenty for our makeshift family here, and although I haven't bothered to bring Isofix car seats, we can see that the Isofix points are a bit rubbish because you have to shove the fix in through a gap in the cushion, which isn't as good as a plastic gap. Naughty Mazda. But if you follow me round to the back of the car, oh, bit slippy, you can see that there is loads of room for loads of kit. Push chairs, school bags, PE kit, whatever the kids need for school. And even if they need loads of camera equipment and snow shovels, then that's all good too. Looks like we're off again, so let's get back in the car. So as you can see, we've stopped once again, and that's for a very good reason, is that we need to somehow get over this very large crack you see in front of you.
As it turned out, the technique for getting across was predictably risky. After finding a narrow enough section, the expedition leaders simply shoveled a bit more snow into the gap and then stuck a couple of flimsy looking planks over the top. But however treacherous, it was the only way over, so we had no option but to engage blind faith mode, shut our eyes and hope for the best.
And it's a big bump.
It was only after we'd made it over that our host saw fit to tell us that this was the first time they'd ever bridged a crack in this way.
So now we've come into a different bit of terrain, which is, it just looks like really sharp, spiky bits of ice just poking up through the snow. And now the car is taking a proper pounding. This is where the suspension is really earning its keep.
With the amount of punishment the car was taking, we were getting genuinely concerned that the obvious damage being done could jeopardise our chances of completing the crossing. The weather had also turned, and the increased severity of the snowdrifts meant that members of our convoy were regularly getting stuck, so our progress became very slow and staccato. That's no slight on the CX-5. In snow this deep, there aren't many cars that wouldn't get stuck.
So it looks like we're coming to the end of the lake now. I think that's it. Is that it? Well, this place is absolutely beautiful and I love driving cars, but that was an enormously stressful experience. Was it enjoyable? In a perverse kind of way, but yeah, very stressful.
But we weren't out of the woods just yet. In fact, we were only just heading into them. We headed out onto the Trans-Siberian Highway, which is flanked either side by frozen forest, and for many miles runs parallel with the famous Trans-Siberian Railway. We still had a good 4 hours ahead of us on slippery roads filled with slow-moving lorries that needed overtaking, so we still had to keep our wits about us. Finally though, we arrived on the outskirts of Ulan-Ude, our final destination, meaning that our hardcore school run was almost complete.
This looks like the teacher. There you go, Professor. Be good, kids. So I'd say that the CX-5 has proved itself to be much more than just a school run special. Not only was that journey dangerous, but the driving conditions were really difficult. Some of the most difficult that I have ever encountered. But the CX-5 kept us going over the slippery bits, and it took an absolute pounding from all those bumps. Seriously, the fact that this car made it at all is super impressive. Should you consider buying one? Well, if you want an incredibly solid family SUV, then yes, you should definitely consider it. Just don't buy this one, because this one probably knackered, and I know how it feels. Cheers.